In the quiet town of Millbrook, a 90-year-old woman named Doris Mackenzie was about to prove that age is just a number when it comes to fighting evil. She appeared to be nothing more than a gentle grandmother who fed stray cats and volunteered at the community center, until the day the Steel Reapers motorcycle gang made the fatal mistake of trying to intimidate her at May's Diner. What the notorious criminals didn't know was that this unassuming elderly woman was one of World War II's most legendary covert operatives, known only as the Ghost, with a network of intelligence contacts spanning the globe and a history of outsmarting the deadliest enemies. When Rex Thompson, the Steel Reapers' ruthless leader, thought he'd found an easy target in this small town, he instead unleashed a force he never saw coming. One mysterious phone call from Doris activated a web of highly trained operatives, decorated veterans, tech experts, and skilled tacticians who owed their lives to the mission she'd run decades ago in occupied France. What started as simple intimidation would evolve into an extraordinary battle that would expose a criminal empire and transform a terrorized town into a united community ready to stand against tyranny. But the Steel Reapers were just the beginning. As Doris's victory draws the attention of an even deadlier adversary, she must decide if she has one final war left to fight. At 90 years old, the Ghost is about to remind the world why some legends never really retire. Before we continue this incredible tale, tell us in the comments where in the world are you tuning from today, and if you believe in standing up against bullies and injustice. Make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about extraordinary individuals who prove that courage knows no age. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Doris Mackenzie made her way through Morton's grocery, her weathered hands gripping a small shopping basket. At 90 years old, she moved with deliberate grace, her silver hair neatly pinned back, and her clothes pressed to perfection despite their age. The familiar aisles of canned goods and fresh produce had been her weekly routine for longer than most of the staff had been alive. "Good morning, Mrs. Mackenzie," called Sarah, the teenage cashier, her braces glinting as she smiled. "Don't forget we've got those cat food tins on special today." Doris's blue eyes twinkled. "Thank you, dear. My little visitors will appreciate that." She added several cans to her basket, knowing the strays that gathered in her backyard would be waiting for their daily meal. As she passed the bakery section, Mr. Morton himself emerged from behind the counter. "Doris, I saved you some of those sourdough rolls you like. Made them fresh this morning." "You're too kind, James," Doris replied, accepting the paper bag with a grateful nod. "How's that grandson of yours doing in college?" "Top of his class, thanks to those math tutorials you gave him last summer. I still don't know how you made calculus click for him when none of his teachers could." Doris waved off the praise. Sometimes all it takes is a different perspective. Outside the store, she carefully arranged her groceries in her aged but immaculately maintained Volvo. A group of younger women passed by, whispering among themselves. "Sweet old lady," one said, just loud enough to be heard. "Shame she lives all alone in that big house. At least she's got her cats," another replied with a laugh. "Harmless as they come." Doris pretended not to hear, but a slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. Let them think what they wanted. She had learned long ago that being underestimated could be a powerful advantage. At home, she went through her afternoon ritual. The strays gathered as she filled their bowls, a motley crew of cats that she'd secretly named after old friends long gone. "There you go, Eleanor," she murmured to a graying tabby. "And here's yours, Francis." A one-eyed orange Tom rubbed against her leg in gratitude. The peaceful afternoon was shattered by a sound that made the cats scatter, the thunderous roar of motorcycle engines. Doris straightened up, her expression hardening as she watched a convoy of black motorcycles tear down her quiet street. The riders wore leather jackets emblazoned with a gleaming silver emblem, a chrome skull wreathed in chains. "The Steel Reapers," she muttered, recognizing the infamous gang from news reports. They had been moving from town to town across the state, leaving a trail of fear and destruction in their wake. Leading the pack was a massive man with a shaved head and a beard streaked with gray. Even from a distance, Doris could see the cruel set of his jaw and the way the other riders deferred to him. This would be Rex Thompson, the gang's notorious leader. As the days passed, the Steel Reapers made their presence known throughout the town. Store windows were mysteriously broken, cars vandalized, and people hurried home before dark. The local police seemed powerless, or unwilling, to stop them. Doris maintained her routines, including her morning breakfast at May's diner. She sat in her usual booth, spreading jam on her toast as May herself topped off her coffee. "You shouldn't be out alone these days, Doris," May whispered, glancing nervously at the window. "Those bikers, they're animals. Did you hear what they did to Pete's garage?" "I heard," Doris replied calmly. "But I won't let bullies dictate how I live my life." The bell above the door chimed, and the diner fell silent. Rex and 4 of his men swaggered in, their boots heavy on the checkerboard floor. They took over the counter, shoving aside other customers' plates and demanding service. "Hey, Grandma," one of them called to May, who was trembling behind the counter. "Where's my coffee? And make it quick, before you break a hip." The other bikers laughed, but May's hands shook so badly she could barely lift the coffee pot. Coffee splashed onto the counter, and Rex's face darkened. "Clumsy old bat," he snarled, rising to his full height. "Maybe we need to teach you how to serve customers properly." "Oh, sit down and stop making a fool of yourself." Doris's clear voice cut through the tension. Every head in the diner turned toward her booth. Rex stalked over, looming over her table. "What did you say to me, you old bag?" Doris dabbed her mouth with a napkin and looked up at him with calm eyes. "I said you're making a fool of yourself. Bullying a grandmother over spilled coffee? Is that what passes for toughness these days? In my time, real men didn't need to pick on the elderly to feel strong." A few snickers escaped from the other diners before they could stop themselves. Rex's face turned purple with rage. "You don't know who you're dealing with, lady," he growled. "On the contrary," Doris replied, her voice taking on an edge of steel that made several people blink in surprise. "I know exactly what you are. A small man with a big motorcycle, trying to compensate for his obvious intellectual shortcomings. Tell me, did you have trouble with basic arithmetic in school? Is that why you turned to intimidation instead of education?" The diner erupted in shocked laughter before falling into a tense silence. Rex's men shifted uncomfortably, avoiding their leader's gaze. For a moment, Rex seemed too stunned to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, he leaned down, his face inches from Doris's. "You just signed your own death warrant, Grandma. Nobody talks to me like that. Nobody. Yet here I am, doing just that," Doris replied, calmly sipping her coffee. "And it's Mrs. Mackenzie to you, young man." Rex straightened up, his fists clenched. "You're going to regret this. Mark my words." As the bikers stormed out, the other patrons rushed to Doris's table. "Mrs. Mackenzie, you have to apologize," urged Tom Wheeler, the hardware store owner. "They'll destroy everything you own." "Please, Doris," May begged. "It's not worth it. Just tell them you're sorry." Doris stood, reaching for her purse. "Bullies thrive on fear, and I won't give them mine. I didn't face down worse threats than Rex Thompson, just to cower now." She walked to her car, aware of the worried faces watching from the diner windows. As she settled into the driver's seat, something caught her eye, a small bronze medal hanging from her rearview mirror. Her fingers brushed it gently, and for a moment, she was transported back decades. The sound of gunfire, coded messages in the dark, the weight of responsibility that came with protecting others. "Oh, Robert," she whispered to her late husband's memory. "Looks like retirement might have to wait a bit longer." That night, the Steel Reapers made good on Rex's threat. Doris awoke to the sound of breaking glass and cruel laughter. She remained in her bedroom, listening as they vandalized her property. When silence finally fell, she walked through her house with a flashlight, cataloging the damage. Her garden gnomes lay shattered on the lawn, their cheerful faces broken beyond repair. Crude words were spray-painted across her white walls, old HAG in dripping red letters. Her mailbox had been torn from its post and crushed. As dawn broke, neighbors peeked out their windows at the destruction. When they saw her examining the damage, they quickly drew their curtains. All except Mrs. Peterson next door, who started to step outside but was pulled back in by her husband. Doris understood their fear, even if she didn't share it. She was collecting broken gnome pieces when she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Charlie Martinez, the young mechanic from the garage down the street. He carried a bucket of cleaning supplies and wore a determined expression. "Mrs. Mackenzie," he said, setting down the bucket. "I came to help clean up." What they did, it isn't right. Doris studied him for a moment. Charlie was in his mid-20s, with honest eyes and grease-stained hands that spoke of hard work. She'd seen him around town, always ready to help others with car troubles, often charging less than he should. "Thank you, Charlie," she said, accepting his offer. "Though you might want to consider the risks of being seen helping me." Charlie grabbed a scrub brush and started on the spray paint. "My father taught me that doing the right thing is always worth the risk. Besides, you helped my sister with her college applications last year. She's studying engineering now. Thanks to you." As they worked together, Charlie couldn't help asking, "Why don't you leave, Mrs. Mackenzie? Just until things calm down? My aunt has a spare room in the next town over." Doris straightened up, her eyes scanning the street she'd called home for over 50 years. "This town has always been worth fighting for, Charlie. Always will be." Something in her tone made Charlie pause. There was steel beneath the grandmother's gentle exterior, a hint of something that reminded him of his uncle who'd served in special forces. When the cleanup was finished, Doris invited Charlie in for lemonade. As she headed to the kitchen, she passed her hall closet and paused. After a moment's consideration, she opened the door and reached into its depths, pulling out an old black rotary phone. Charlie watched curiously as she placed it on her kitchen table. "That's quite an antique," he commented. Doris ran her fingers over the dial, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes old things are exactly what we need." She stared at the phone for a long moment before turning to pour the lemonade, leaving Charlie to wonder about the strange intensity in her eyes. As the sun set that evening, Doris sat alone in her kitchen, the rotary phone before her like a sentinel from the past. She opened a drawer and pulled out a worn notebook, its pages filled with numbers and codes that hadn't been used in decades. Her hands, steady despite their age, began to turn the rotary dial, each click echoing with purpose in the quiet house. The time had come to call in some very old debts. The morning dawned cold and gray over Main Street as Pete Miller swept up the shattered glass from his garage's storefront window. His hands trembled, not from the autumn chill, but from the memory of last night's visitors. The Steel Reapers had made their protection racket crystal clear: pay up or face escalating consequences. Inside the garage, Charlie Martinez watched his boss with growing concern. Through the broken window, he could see other business owners performing similar cleanup rituals. Mr. Chin sweeping debris from his restaurant's doorway, Sarah from the flower shop replacing knocked-over displays. "Third time this month," Pete muttered, emptying the dustpan. "Can't keep paying their demands, but can't afford these repairs either." The rumble of motorcycles sent Pete scurrying inside, leaving the rest of the glass where it lay. 3 Steel Reapers cruised past, their chrome skull emblems glinting menacingly in the morning light. They rode slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone saw them. Like sharks circling their prey, Charlie observed, his jaw tight with anger. "Keep your head down, boy," Pete warned. "Don't go getting any ideas about being a hero. Look what happened to old Bill when he tried standing up to them." Charlie knew. Everyone knew. Bill's restaurant had mysteriously caught fire last week, with enough evidence destroyed to make it look like an accident. The message was clear: resistance was futile. Later that morning, Charlie noticed Doris's Volvo parked outside the garage, its side panel dented and scratched. She stood examining the damage with her usual calm demeanor, as if assessing nothing more serious than a paint chip. "Mrs. Mackenzie," Charlie called out, wiping his hands on a shop rag as he approached. "Let me take a look at that for you." "Good morning, Charlie," she smiled. "I'm afraid someone took exception to my parking job at the supermarket. Rather forcefully, it seems." They both knew it wasn't a parking accident. The Steel Reaper's handiwork was obvious in the deliberate nature of the damage. "I can fix this up for you," Charlie offered. "No charge." "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly dash." "Please," Charlie insisted. "After you helped clean up my sister's college essays? It's the least I can do." As Charlie worked on the car, Doris sat in the garage's small waiting area, sipping coffee from a paper cup. The radio played softly in the background, its news report detailing yet another small town that had fallen under the Steel Reaper's influence. "You know," Charlie said, pausing in his work, "I've been meaning to ask. That medal I saw in your car, it looked military." Doris's eyes took on a distant look. "Yes, from another lifetime ago." World War II. You served? Charlie's surprise was evident in his voice. Oh, Women's Army Corps. Though my actual duties were somewhat specialized. She smiled mysteriously. What kind of duties? Oh, this and that. Mostly coding work, message interpretation. Nothing terribly exciting. But something in her tone suggested otherwise. Charlie wanted to ask more, but Doris smoothly changed the subject, asking about his sister's engineering studies. He recognized the deflection, but didn't push. There was something about Mrs. Mackenzie that hinted at depths he couldn't begin to fathom. Later that afternoon, Doris was loading groceries into her freshly repaired car when shadows fell across her shopping cart. Looking up, she found herself surrounded by Rex and 3 of his men, their leather jackets creaking as they closed ranks around her. Well, Rex sneered. If it isn't the mouth that roared. Still feeling brave, Grandma? Doris calmly placed her bag of eggs in the cart. Mr. Thompson, I see you brought backup to intimidate an elderly woman. How very masculine of you. Rex's face darkened. He reached into her cart, grabbed the egg carton, and crushed it in his massive hand. Yellow yolks dripped between his fingers onto the asphalt. Consider that a warning, he growled. Stop stirring up trouble in my town. Stop encouraging others to resist. Or next time, it won't be eggs we're crushing. Doris met his gaze steadily. Your town? You have no idea who you're dealing with, son. Rex threw back his head and laughed, his men joining in. Delusional old bat. You watch too many movies, Grandma. This isn't some fairy tale where the underdog wins. This is real life, and in real life, people like you get hurt. Indeed they do, Doris replied softly, her voice carrying an edge that made one of Rex's men step back involuntarily. People like me have been hurt many times before. We've also done plenty of hurting ourselves, when necessary. Something in her tone made Rex's laughter fade. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then he spat on the ground near her feet and gestured to his men. They mounted their bikes and roared away, leaving Doris standing amid the ruined eggs. Mr. Morton hurried out from his store. Mrs. Mackenzie, are you all right? Here, let me replace those eggs for you, no charge. Thank you, James, but that won't be necessary. She checked her watch. I believe it's time I made a phone call. That night, the steel reapers struck again. Doris awoke to the sound of splintering wood and metallic screeching. When morning came, she found her mailbox completely destroyed, its pieces scattered across her lawn. Her front door bore fresh spray paint, and a note had been nailed to the wood. Next time it's your car. She collected the note carefully, using a handkerchief to avoid disturbing any fingerprints. Then she went inside, straight to where the old rotary phone sat waiting on her kitchen table. Her movements were precise as she lifted the receiver and dialed a number from memory. The line clicked once, twice, then connected. This is Doris Mackenzie, she said, her voice clear and commanding. It's time. Call in the favor. She replaced the receiver and waited. Across the country, other phones began to ring. In a Pentagon office, a retired general named Marcus Webb looked up from his desk as a secure line buzzed. His secretary never patched calls through on that line. When he answered and heard the message, his weathered face broke into a fierce grin. Well, the ghost needs her help. It's been too long. In Silicon Valley, tech mogul Sarah Chun was testing a new security algorithm when her private phone, the one whose number less than 10 people possessed, lit up. She listened, then immediately began typing commands into her computer. Time to repay an old debt, she murmured. In Washington, D.C., Senator Diana Reynolds excused herself from a committee meeting when her aide handed her an urgent message. Reading it, she smiled and reached for her phone. Clear my schedule, she told her staff. Something's come up, something from the old days. Back in town, the atmosphere had grown even more tense. As Doris walked down Main Street the next morning, she noticed people actively avoiding her gaze. Shop owners who had always greeted her warmly now hurried inside when they saw her coming. Parents pulled their children to the other side of the street. At May's Diner, her usual booth remained empty, but no one would sit near it. May herself served Doris with trembling hands, avoiding conversation. I'm sorry, Doris, May whispered as she refilled her coffee. We can't risk it. They hurt people. They hurt families. I understand, Doris replied gently. Fear is a powerful motivator, but it's not the only one. That evening, Doris moved through her house with military precision, checking locks and sight lines. She drew her curtains carefully, leaving the smallest gaps for observation. The rotary phone on her kitchen table had begun to emit a faint, pulsing glow from its base, a modification from long ago, indicating incoming communications. As midnight approached, a black SUV with government plates rolled quietly into town. It parked in the shadows of the closed hardware store, its engine ticking as it cooled. A man in his early 60s stepped out, his movement suggesting military training despite his civilian clothes. He surveyed the street with practiced eyes, noting security cameras and potential vantage points. The man touched his ear briefly. "Alpha point secured," he murmured. "Ghost, do you copy?" In her kitchen, Doris smiled as she heard the familiar voice through her phone's speaker. "Copy that, Major Henderson," she replied. "Welcome to the party." She opened her notebook and began writing down the messages coming in from across the country. Her network was awakening, pieces moving into position. Soon, the Steel Reapers would learn what it meant to face an enemy they couldn't intimidate, an enemy who had spent decades preparing for battles just like this. As she wrote, her hand passed over an old photograph tucked into the notebook's pages. It showed a much younger Doris in military uniform, standing among a group of serious-looking men and women. Their faces were partially obscured, but their bearing was unmistakable. These were people who had changed the course of history from the shadows. The rotary phone's glow pulsed again, and Doris reached for it with a steady hand. The time for hiding was over. Now it was time to show Rex Thompson and his Steel Reapers why some legends never really retire. In the distance, more vehicles were approaching the town limits. To the untrained eye, they looked ordinary enough: a delivery van, a few sedans, a cable company truck. But each one carried members of Doris's old network, people who owed their lives or their freedom to the quiet operations she had run decades ago. The pieces were in place. The board was set, and Doris Mackenzie, known to a select few as the Ghost, was ready to play a game she had never really forgotten. She picked up her phone one final time that night. "All units, maintain radio silence until dawn. And remember, we're here to save the town, not destroy it. Ghost out." As she prepared for bed, Doris paused at her window, watching the subtle movements of her people taking up their positions. The Steel Reapers thought they had isolated her, cut her off from support. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. "Sleep well, Rex," she murmured, drawing her curtains closed. "Tomorrow, your education begins." Doris tossed and turned in her sleep, her mind drifting back through the decades. The comfortable bedroom of her present dissolved into the stark reality of 1943. She sat at a wooden desk, surrounded by encryption machines and coded messages. Her fingers flew across the typewriter keys, translating intercepted German communications. The room was dim, lit only by desk lamps that cast long shadows across the walls of Bletchley Park. "Miss Winters," a commanding voice called. She looked up to see Colonel Harrison, his face grave. "We've intercepted something unusual. The pattern doesn't match any known Enigma settings." Young Doris took the paper, her eyes scanning the seemingly random letters. "It's not Enigma," she said after a moment. "They're using a double cipher. Look at the spacing between characters." The colonel leaned in as she quickly decoded the message, revealing plans for a secret German weapons facility. Her discovery would save thousands of lives. The scene shifted. Now she was in France, crouched in a bell tower with a rifle. Her breath was steady as she watched German officers entering a building below. Her job wasn't just to decode messages. Sometimes she had to act on them. "Ghost, are you in position?" crackled her radio. "Affirmative," she whispered. "Target acquired. 1 shot, 1 kill." By the time the Germans searched the tower, she was gone, like a ghost. Doris awoke with a start, her heart racing. The memories were as vivid as ever. She glanced at her bedside clock. 3 a.m. Somewhere in town, her network was assembling. Dawn revealed subtle changes in the quiet community. A middle-aged woman checked into the Pine Valley Motel, her designer luggage concealing state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. Dr. Emily Wong, cybersecurity expert and former NSA operative, had arrived. At the local coffee shop, A man in a rumpled suit ordered his fourth espresso. James Cooper, demolitions expert turned structural engineer, was establishing his cover as an insurance adjuster. The hardware store had a new part-time worker. Few would guess that Marcus Webb Jr., son of the retired general, had spent 15 years in Delta Force. They moved through the town like ghosts themselves, invisible in their ordinariness. Each carried a burner phone with one number programmed into it, Doris's. That morning, Charlie arrived at Doris's house to check on her car. As she led him to the kitchen for coffee, he noticed a yellowed newspaper that had fallen from a shelf. The headline caught his eye: "Female code breaker prevents major attack." The photo showed a young woman in uniform, her face partially obscured but unmistakably Doris. The article praised the mysterious operative, known only as the Ghost, for preventing a devastating assault on Allied forces. "Mrs. Mackenzie," Charlie said slowly, "this is you, isn't it?" Doris took the paper, handling it with care. "Yes, though that photo wasn't supposed to be published. Someone got careless at the War Department. You were a codebreaker?" "Among other things." She sat down, gesturing for Charlie to join her. "The Nazis had brilliant mathematicians working for them. We had to be better, smarter, more creative. Lives depended on our ability to crack their codes faster than they could create new ones." "And the nickname?" "The Ghost." A small smile played at her lips. "Let's just say I had a talent for getting into and out of places unnoticed. When you're a woman in a war zone, being underestimated is an advantage." Before Charlie could ask more questions, they heard motorcycles roaring down the street. But these weren't the Steel Reaper's usual bikes. 3 large trucks followed them, covered in tarp. "They're expanding," Doris observed grimly, "moving beyond simple intimidation into bigger operations." Across town, Dr. Wong sat in her motel room, surrounded by monitors. Her fingers flew across keyboards as she accessed security camera feeds, phone records, and financial transactions. "Ghost, are you receiving?" She spoke into a secure line. "Go ahead, Nightingale," Doris responded, using Wong's old code name. "The corruption runs deeper than we thought. I've traced significant payments from offshore accounts to both Mayor Williams and Sheriff Parker. They've been on the Steel Reaper's payroll for months. Can you document it?" "Already done. But there's more. The mayor's meeting Rex tonight at the abandoned warehouse on River Street. I've hacked their security cameras." That evening, crystal-clear footage showed Mayor Williams shaking hands with Rex, accepting a thick envelope. Their conversation about keeping the roads clear for incoming shipments was captured perfectly. By morning, the video had mysteriously appeared on local news stations and social media. The town was buzzing with outrage. "This is clear evidence of corruption," someone shouted at an emergency town meeting. But Sheriff Parker quickly took control. "The video is clearly doctored. We're investigating this malicious attempt to slander our mayor. Meanwhile, any sharing of this fake footage will be prosecuted." The threat worked. The outrage subsided into fearful murmurs. Later that day, Charlie found Doris sitting in her garden, looking troubled. "Something about Rex has been bothering you, hasn't it?" he asked, beyond just his current actions. Doris was quiet for a long moment. "He reminds me of someone. An officer I knew during the war, Captain Wagner. He used his position to terrorize civilians, steal their possessions, abuse his power. I had evidence of his crimes, but..." She trailed off. "What happened?" "Politics got in the way. He was connected to important people. By the time I could act, he'd disappeared. I always regretted not stopping him sooner, before he could hurt more people." Her eyes hardened. "I won't make the same mistake twice." That night, Doris's team executed their first direct action. As the Steel Reaper's trucks approached town, they encountered unexpected problems. Traffic lights malfunctioned. Roads were mysteriously blocked by construction. The lead truck, following its GPS, found itself trapped in a dead-end alley. By the time Rex's men realized something was wrong, it was too late. The truck's contents, boxes of illegal drugs, had vanished. In their place was a simple note: "You're being watched." Rex's reaction was explosive. He threw furniture around his office, screaming in rage. "Someone's interfering. But who? Who in this pathetic town has the guts?" His men had no answers. Security cameras had mysteriously failed. Witnesses reported nothing. It was as if ghosts had pulled off the heist. "Find them." Rex roared. "Turn this town upside down if you have to." But as the Steel Reapers harassed citizens and search buildings, Doris's network watched and recorded everything. Each act of intimidation, each threat, each bribe was documented and added to their growing file. Unknown to everyone, even to Doris, one member of her team was making copies of these files. Peter Nash, communications specialist, had been approached by someone offering a lot of money for information about the operation. He hadn't accepted yet, but the seed of betrayal had been planted. The next morning, Doris held a briefing in her basement, converted now into a high-tech command center. As she reviewed the operation's success, she noticed Peter's nervousness, the way he avoided eye contact. She had seen that look before, in the war, the look of someone wrestling with temptation, with fear, with greed. She made a mental note to watch him more closely. "Well done, everyone," she concluded. "But remember, this was just a warning shot. Rex won't back down easily. He's wounded and angry, which makes him more dangerous. Like a cornered animal," Charlie added. He had been included in the briefing at Doris's insistence, despite some team members' reservations. "Exactly," Doris agreed. "And cornered animals are unpredictable. We need to be prepared for anything." As the team dispersed, Peter lingered behind, apparently checking his equipment. Doris pretended not to notice as he copied files to a separate drive. "Everything all right, Peter?" she asked casually. He startled. "Yes, ma'am. Just being thorough." "Good." "Thoroughness is important. So is loyalty." She held his gaze until he looked away. "We'll talk more later." After everyone left, Charlie helped Doris clean up. "I still can't believe all this," he said, gesturing at the sophisticated setup. "You're like something out of a spy movie." Doris chuckled. "Real intelligence work isn't as glamorous as the movies. It's about patience, observation, and understanding human nature." She paused. "Speaking of which, what did you make of Peter?" Charlie frowned. He seemed distracted. "Nervous? Keep an eye on him for me, would you?" Discreetly. "You think he's a problem?" "Let's just say I've learned to trust my instincts about people. And right now, those instincts are telling me to be careful." That night, as Doris prepared for bed, she heard the distant rumble of motorcycles. Rex's men were still searching, still angry, still dangerous. But now they were also afraid, and fear made them vulnerable. She smiled as she remembered another lesson from the war. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a gun or a bomb, but uncertainty. The Steel Reapers were used to being the ones who caused fear. Now they were experiencing it themselves, and they didn't like it one bit. "Sleep well, Rex," she murmured, turning out her light. "And wonder who's watching you." In his office above the bar, Rex was doing exactly that. He paced like a caged tiger, jumping at shadows. Someone had outsmarted him, embarrassed him, and they were going to pay. He just had to figure out who it was. The note from the truck heist lay crumpled on his desk. "You're being watched." Simple words, but they had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Because deep down, Rex Thompson, the fearsome leader of the Steel Reapers, was starting to feel something he hadn't felt in years: fear. And in her bed, Doris dreamed again of France, of codes and courage, of justice delayed but not denied. This time, she would make sure the bullies were stopped. This time, the ghost would finish what she started. Charlie was closing up the garage late one evening when something caught his eye, a faint glint in the corner near the ceiling. Standing on a workbench for a closer look, his blood ran cold. A tiny camera was expertly hidden in the shadow of a beam, its lens focused on the main work area. Moving methodically through the shop, he found two more cameras. They were professional grade, not the kind of surveillance equipment found at the local hardware store. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone to call Doris. "Don't remove them," she instructed after he described his discovery. "And Charlie? Act natural. Assume they're watching." In her basement command center, Doris studied the surveillance feeds Dr. Wong had intercepted from the hidden cameras. The Steel Reapers were monitoring multiple locations across town, suggesting an operation far more sophisticated than simple gang activity. "They're using the garage as a checkpoint," she explained to her team during an emergency briefing. "Every vehicle that comes through gets logged. They're tracking shipments." General Webb's son, Marcus Jr., pointed to a map on the wall. "The town's location is perfect, halfway between major cities, multiple escape routes, minimal law enforcement presence. Classic trafficking hub. Not just drugs, Dr. Wong added, pulling up financial records. I've traced several large payments to human trafficking networks in Asia and Eastern Europe. They're moving people through here too. And weapons. James Cooper, the demolitions expert, noted. Those trucks we intercepted had hidden compartments. Standard gun-running setup. Doris absorbed the information with a grim expression. The Steel Reapers weren't just thugs. They were a sophisticated criminal enterprise using the town as a staging ground for multiple illegal operations. The next day, everything went wrong. A carefully planned intercept of a weapons shipment turned into a disaster when the trucks took an unexpected route, completely avoiding their trap. Somehow, the Steel Reapers had known. They had our exact positions. Marcus Jr. fumed during the debrief. Someone tipped them off? Doris studied her team's faces carefully. Peter Nash avoided her gaze, pretending to be absorbed in his laptop. She noticed him slip a thumb drive into his pocket when he thought no one was looking. Before she could act on her suspicions, catastrophe struck. Charlie disappeared. The call came at midnight. Missing something, Ghost? Rex's voice dripped with satisfaction. Your young friend is very loyal. Hasn't said a word, despite some persuasion. Doris's hand tightened on the phone. If you heard him dash, that's up to you, isn't it? Come alone to the old mill at sunrise. Surrender yourself, and maybe he walks away. Try anything clever, and they'll never find his body. She could hear Charlie in the background, shouting through what sounded like a gag. Don't do it, Mrs. Mackenzie. Don't dash. The sound cut off with a thud. Sunrise, Rex repeated. Alone, or the kid dies. The team argued passionately against her surrendering. It's obviously a trap, General Webb insisted over the secure line. They'll kill you both. Which is why we're not going to play by their rules, Doris replied. Her voice took on the sharp edge of command that had earned her the nickname Ghost during the war. Here's what we're going to do. The old mill stood dark and abandoned at the edge of town. Rex's men patrolled the perimeter, while inside, Charlie sat bound to a chair, his face bruised but his spirit unbroken. She's smarter than you, he told Rex. She'll figure out what you really are. Rex backhanded him across the face. Shut up. You don't know anything about what we really are. He knows enough. Doris's voice echoed through the darkness. Rex spun around, but she seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Show yourself. Old woman. Why? Afraid of ghosts? While Doris's voice kept Rex distracted, other things were happening in the shadows. Dr. Wong had hacked the mill's ancient electrical system, creating random power fluctuations. James Cooper's expertise with explosives produced small diversions at strategic points around the building. One by one, Rex's men fell silent as Marcus Jr. and his team neutralized them. The Steel Reapers were tough street fighters, but they were no match for trained military operators. It's over, Rex, Doris said, finally stepping into view. She looked different. Gone was the gentle grandmother. In her place stood a warrior, her movements precise and deadly. Release the boy. Nothing's over. Rex raised a gun to Charlie's head. I'll kill him. I swear I'll dash. The gun flew from his hand, knocked away by a precisely thrown knife from the shadows. Before he could react, Rex found himself surrounded by Doris's team. Charlie was quickly freed, but Doris's satisfaction was tempered by a troubling realization. The Steel Reapers had adapted too quickly to their tactics, had been too well prepared. Their operation was more sophisticated than any ordinary gang should be. Later, as the team celebrated Charlie's rescue, Peter Nash made a crucial mistake. He mentioned details about their next planned operation, details that hadn't been shared in any briefing. Doris caught Dr. Wong's eye and gave a subtle nod. Within hours, Wong had traced Peter's communications to an encrypted channel used by the Steel Reapers. But Doris didn't confront him immediately. Sun Tzu's ancient wisdom echoed in her mind. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Peter would lead them to his contacts, revealing the full scope of the conspiracy. That night, alone in her study, Doris pulled out a sheet of her best stationery and began to write. My dearest Robert, tonight I find myself back in the shadows, fighting a war I thought we'd finished long ago. You always said evil doesn't rest. It just changes masks. You were right, my love. I'm sorry I couldn't leave it behind like I promised. But when I see the fear in people's eyes, when I watch bullies destroy everything good and decent, I hear your voice telling me that some battles choose us. Charlie reminds me of you at that age, so brave, so determined to do what's right. I couldn't save you in France, but I swear I'll protect him. In this town, and everyone else these criminals have threatened, the war never really ended for me, did it? Perhaps that's my curse, or my purpose, to stand watch while others sleep, to fight the battles they can't see. I miss you every day. Wish me luck, my darling. Your ghost has one more mission to complete. Forever yours, Doris. A tear splashed onto the paper as she folded it carefully and placed it in a box with her other letters to Robert. Outside, a motorcycle roared past, Rex, making sure she knew he was watching. In his new hideout, Rex was in a rage. The rescue had humiliated him, destroyed his image of invincibility. I don't care what it takes, he screamed at his remaining men. Find out everything about her. I want to know every weakness, every vulnerability. I'm going to destroy her myself. But his anger couldn't mask his fear. The ghost had outmaneuvered him at every turn. His superiors in the organization were getting impatient, demanding explanations for the disrupted shipments and lost revenue. You promised us this town would be secure, the voice on the phone had said. Fix it, or we'll fix you. In her basement command center, Doris gathered her team. Maps covered the walls, showing known Steel Reapers' locations, shipping routes, and suspected safe houses. Dr. Wong's computers hummed as they processed surveillance data and intercepted communications. They're planning something big, Doris told her team. Something that will justify their investment in this town. We need to find out what it is and stop it. What about Peter? Marcus Jr. asked. Keep him close. Feed him carefully selected information. He'll lead us to their plans. Charlie, his face still showing bruises from his ordeal, stood up. I want to help. Really help. Not just be the kid you need to protect. Doris studied him thoughtfully. She saw in him the same fire she'd seen in young resistance fighters during the war. The determination that came from facing evil and choosing to fight back. Very well, she said. James, start training him in basic tradecraft. Dr. Wong, show him how to spot surveillance. Marcus, teach him some self-defense. But Charlie, she fixed him with a stern look, no unnecessary risks. We do this smart, we do this careful, we do this right. The team worked through the night, planning their next moves. They knew the Steel Reapers would strike back hard, trying to reassert their dominance over the town. But Doris had fought bigger, badder enemies than Rex Thompson. As dawn approached, she stood at her window, watching her town wake up. Somewhere out there, Rex was plotting his revenge. Peter was feeding information to his secret contacts. A criminal empire was preparing to protect its investment. But they didn't know what she knew. That sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one they've dismissed, the one they've underestimated. They thought they were hunting her, but in reality, the ghost was hunting them. And ghosts, as Rex was about to learn, could be very, very patient. Dr. Wong's laptop screen flickered in the dim light of Doris's basement command center. Lines of code scrolled past as she traced the encrypted communications she'd been monitoring. It's confirmed, she said quietly. Peter's been sending regular updates to an anonymous email address. I've backtraced it to the Steel Reapers network. Doris stood behind her, watching the evidence pile up. Bank records showed regular deposits into Peter's offshore account. Payments that coincided with failed operations and leaked intelligence. Personal debts, Marcus Jr. commented, examining Peter's financial history. Gambling mostly. He's been underwater for months. Where is he now? Doris asked. In his motel room, Dr. Wong replied. Should we move on him? Doris shook her head. No, I'll handle this myself. Sometimes the best way to deal with a snake is to look it in the eye. Peter jumped when he opened his motel room door to find Doris sitting calmly in the armchair by the window. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, making her seem almost ethereal. Hello, Peter, she said softly. Shall we discuss your extracurricular activities? Mrs. Mackenzie, I was just heading out to Dash to send your evening report to Rex. Rather difficult now that Dr. Wong has blocked your usual channels. She gestured to the chair opposite her. Sit down. He sat, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Paris, 1944, Doris began, her voice taking on a distant quality. We caught a German spy in our resistance network. Young man like you. He'd been feeding information to the Nazis for money. Do you know what happened to him? Peter swallowed hard. They executed him? No. I convinced them to turn him. Fed false information through him for months. It worked beautifully, right until the moment his Nazi handlers realized they'd been played. They found him in an alley. She leaned forward. War is cruel, Peter. But betrayal? Betrayal is something else entirely. They would have killed me. Peter burst out, cracking under her steady gaze. I owed them money from before. When they found out I was working with you, they said either I helped them or... And now? What do you think they'll do when they no longer need you? The color drained from Peter's face as the reality of his situation sank in. I can help you, Peter, Doris said gently. But first, you need to help us. An hour later, Peter had confessed everything. The Steel Reaper's blackmail, the payments, the information he'd passed along. But instead of turning him over to the authorities, Doris had a different plan. You'll continue communicating with them, she explained to her team. But now we control the narrative. Every piece of intelligence they receive will be exactly what we want them to believe. That night, Peter sent his usual update, including details about a planned operation that existed only in Doris's imagination. The trap was set. The next morning, the town woke to a new video spreading like wildfire across social media. Crystal clear footage showed Sheriff Parker accepting an envelope full of cash from Rex behind the police station, their conversation about keeping the heat off clearly audible. The sheriff tried to dismiss it as fake, but the evidence was too compelling. For the first time, people began openly questioning the Steel Reaper's hold on the town. Linda Chun, who owned the small market on Maple Street, was the first to act. Under cover of darkness, she delivered boxes of supplies to Doris's team. Food, first aid supplies, burner phones. My father fought tyranny in our homeland, she told Doris. He taught me that evil only wins when good people do nothing. The Steel Reaper's response was swift and brutal. The next night, they rampaged through the town square, smashing windows and spray-painting threats on walls. Linda's market was their final target. They didn't just vandalize it, they set it on fire. Doris stood with Linda, watching firefighters battle the blaze. I'll make this right, she promised. They won't get away with this. But Doris had already set another plan in motion. Using her psychological warfare training from the war, she began planting seeds of doubt within the Steel Reaper's ranks. Anonymous texts appeared on gang members' phones, suggesting that their friends were informants. Money went missing from their accounts, with evidence pointing to other members. Whispered conversations were recorded and played back selectively, breeding suspicion and paranoia. Watch Kruger, one member would hear. He's been talking to the feds. Baker's skimming from the shipments, another would be told. The gang began to fracture from within. Members accused each other of betrayal. Fistfights broke out over imagined slights. While Rex's organization tore itself apart, Doris's team struck their biggest blow yet. They intercepted a massive weapons shipment, military-grade firearms bound for the West Coast. The Steel Reapers arrived to find their trucks empty, with a message painted in bold letters. The ghost lives. Rex's reaction was apocalyptic. He beat one of his own men unconscious, suspecting him of betrayal. When Wyatt, his second-in-command, suggested pulling back to regroup, Rex turned on him. You questioning my leadership? Rex roared, shoving Wyatt against a wall. Someone's got to. Wyatt shot back. You're losing it, Rex. This ghost woman's got you jumping at shadows, making mistakes. The boss upstairs isn't going to tolerate much more failure. Get out. Get out before I kill you myself. Wyatt left, taking several loyal members with him. Rex's inner circle was crumbling. But Doris wasn't done yet. Her team released their most damaging evidence. Documents, emails, and recorded conversations proving Mayor Williams hadn't just turned a blind eye to the Steel Reaper's operations. He'd actively facilitated them, taking a percentage of their profits in exchange for municipal contracts that allowed them to move contraband through city facilities. The public outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters surrounded City Hall, demanding the mayor's resignation. When FBI agents were spotted entering his office, Mayor Williams disappeared, leaving a hastily packed office and a resignation letter. That evening, Rex sat alone in his office above the bar, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Demands for explanations from his superiors, complaints from his men, warnings about federal investigations. He pulled up the security footage from the weapons raid, watching again and again as his operation crumbled. The painted message taunted him. The ghost lives. Think you're clever, don't you? He muttered, rewinding the footage once more. Playing your mind games, turning my men against me. But I know your weakness now, Ghost. I know what you care about. On his desk, he spread out surveillance photos. Charlie working at the garage. Linda Chun rebuilding her store. The stray cats Doris fed each morning. The garden she tended so carefully. You want to protect them all, he sneered. Let's see how your precious town likes being caught in the crossfire. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd hoped never to use. It's Thompson. We need the special team. Yes, I know how much they cost. Just get them here. In her kitchen, Doris sat with Charlie and Linda, sharing a pot of tea. They'd become her unofficial family during this struggle, representing everything worth fighting for. The mayor's gone. The sheriff's under investigation, Charlie said. We're winning, aren't we? Perhaps, Doris replied, but her expression was troubled. She'd seen that look in Rex's eyes before, in the faces of cornered animals, in desperate men with nothing left to lose. But a wounded beast is often the most dangerous. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. She didn't tell them about the chatter Dr. Wong had intercepted, about the special team being called in. Some worries were better kept to herself. As night fell over the town, two very different groups made their preparations. In her basement, Doris's team cleaned weapons and studied plans, ready to protect their community. Across town, Rex stared at a map, marking targets for his coming revenge. The war for the soul of the town was entering its final phase, and neither side could predict the devastation that would follow. The Hamilton Community Center had been Doris's sanctuary for over 2 decades. She'd taught knitting classes there, organized food drives, and helped countless children with their homework. Now she watched from across the street as Steel Reaper's motorcycles surrounded the building, their chrome skull emblems gleaming in the morning sun. Rex had chosen his target well. The community center was the heart of the neighborhood, a place where elderly residents gathered for meals, where children attended after-school programs, where families in need could find support. They've got men on all exits, Marcus Jr. reported through her earpiece. At least 15 inside. They're letting the staff leave, but they're keeping the building. Through her binoculars, Doris watched Rex stride out onto the front steps, his leather jacket stretched across his massive frame. He grabbed a megaphone and addressed the gathering crowd. This is your new reality, he bellowed. Your precious ghost wants to play hero? Fine. Let's see her try to save this place without putting all your children at risk. Doris's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Mrs. Mackenzie? The voice was low, urgent. It's Wyatt, Rex's second-in-command. Well, former second-in-command. We need to talk. About what? About stopping Rex before he gets everyone killed. He's lost it completely. I've seen his plans. He's going to destroy this town just to get to you. Dr. Wong was already tracing the call, but Doris didn't need technology to hear the genuine fear in Wyatt's voice. They met an hour later in the basement of St. Michael's Church. Wyatt came alone, unarmed, his usual biker swagger replaced by nervous energy. Rex's connections we never knew about, he explained. Private military contractors, weapons dealers, corrupt officials in high places. He's calling in everything to take you down. And why should I trust you? Doris asked calmly. Your loyalty to Rex was legendary. That was before. Wyatt ran a hand through his graying hair. Before he started talking about bombing schools to send messages. Before he shot Tommy, his own man, for suggesting we back off. He's not a leader anymore. He's a rabid dog. What do you want? Immunity. Protection. In exchange, I'll tell you everything. Where he keeps his records, who he bribes, how his supply chain works. Enough to take down not just Rex, but his whole organization. Doris studied him carefully. She'd seen men like this before, hardened criminals who suddenly discovered their conscience when the ship started sinking. Sometimes they were sincere. Sometimes they were playing both sides. I'll need proof of your sincerity, she said finally. Something concrete. Wyatt reached into his jacket and pulled out a thumb drive. Start with this. It's got Sheriff Parker's entire payoff schedule, plus blackmail material Rex uses to keep him in line. The information proved valuable sooner than expected. That very night, Dr. Wong's surveillance network caught Sheriff Parker trying to leave town in an unmarked car, his trunk loaded with cash and incriminating documents. He's heading for the county line, Dr. Wong reported. Not anymore, Doris replied. Within minutes, the sheriff's car was boxed in by unmarked vehicles. A woman in a crisp FBI jacket approached his window. Sheriff Parker? I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez. We need to have a long conversation about your financial arrangements with the Steel Reapers. As the sheriff was led away in handcuffs, the town's reaction was deeply divided. A crowd gathered outside the police station, some cheering Parker's arrest, others shouting angrily about the chaos engulfing their community. This is all because of that old woman, someone yelled. Everything was fine before she started fighting back. Fine. Linda Chen stepped forward, her burned store still visible down the street. You call living in fear fine? Paying protection money fine? Watching criminals run our town fine? The argument spread through the town like wildfire. Some residents began posting, "I stand with Ghost" signs in their windows. Others blamed Doris for escalating the violence. Charlie watched it all with growing determination. He cornered Doris after her morning briefing. I want in, he said firmly. Really in, not just running errands and passing messages. I've been training with Marcus Jr., learning surveillance from Dr. Wong. I'm ready. Charlie dashed, Doris began. Please, he interrupted. This is my town too. And after what they did to me, after what they're doing to everyone, I need to help stop them. Doris saw the same fire in his eyes that she'd seen in young resistance fighters during the war. The kind of determination that couldn't be taught or bought. All right, she agreed. But we do this smart. No unnecessary risks. As if to validate her decision, Peter chose that moment to burst into the room, his laptop clutched to his chest. They're bringing in explosives, he said breathlessly. I just intercepted the shipping manifest. Rex is planning to rig the entire community center. If anyone tries to retake it, he laid out the details, times, routes, security arrangements. The old Peter would have sold this information to the highest bidder. Now he was racing to prevent a massacre. Thank you, Peter, Doris said softly. This helps restore my faith in people. The operation to intercept the explosives was planned with military precision. Charlie proved his worth, using his knowledge of local back roads to identify the perfect ambush point. Under cover of darkness, Doris's team struck. They disabled the lead vehicles with EMP devices, neutralized the guards with non-lethal force, and secured the explosive materials before Rex's men knew what hit them. The Ghost Lives was painted on every truck, a message that had become a symbol of resistance. But Rex himself slipped away in the chaos, and his retaliation was swift and terrible. Over the next few days, anyone known to support Doris was targeted. Cars were vandalized. Windows were broken. Threats were painted on walls. The morning after the raid, Doris stood in the charred ruins of Linda's market. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of melted plastic and burned dreams. Linda approached quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street. You're blaming yourself, she said, handing Doris a cup. All of this, Doris gestured at the destruction, is happening because I chose to fight back. No, Linda said firmly. It's happening because evil men chose to prey on good people. You just gave us the courage to say enough. Doris touched a blackened wall, her fingers coming away covered in soot. I've seen this before, you know. In occupied France, the Nazis would burn down businesses that helped the resistance. She closed her eyes, memories flooding back. The difference is, this time I have the power to stop it. We have the power, Linda corrected. All of us, together. As if to emphasize her point, a group of townspeople was gathering outside the ruined store. They carried brooms, hammers, cleaning supplies. Leading them was Charlie, a determined set to his jaw. The Ghost isn't alone anymore, he called out. Neither are we. Doris watched as the community came together, clearing debris, planning repairs, supporting each other. Every act of destruction Rex ordered was met with an equal act of restoration. But in her heart, she knew the real battle was still to come. Rex was wounded, cornered, more dangerous than ever. He would strike again, harder this time, caring nothing for collateral damage. Looking at the faces around her, Charlie's determination, Linda's courage, Peter's redemption, the town's awakening spirit, Doris made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever the cost, she would protect these people. The war that had followed her all these years had finally found a purpose. Not just fighting against evil, but fighting for something worth preserving. A community, a future, hope. As the sun set over the burned store, Doris began planning their next move. The ghost had one more battle to fight, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. Rain pattered against the windows of Doris's study as she opened the old cedar chest that held her most precious memories. The scent of aged paper and faded ink filled the air as she lifted out bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbons. "My dearest Doris," she read aloud, her husband's words bringing tears to her eyes. "Another day in this war. Thinking of you. Your last message saved our entire unit. They don't know it was you, of course. Just another decoded intercept. But I know. My ghost. Keeping us all safe from the shadows." She moved through the letters chronologically. Robert's love letters. Updates from her old resistance network. Congratulations on their medals that could never be publicly acknowledged. One letter from Jacques, a French resistance fighter she'd worked with, caught her eye. "We fight not just against evil," she read, "but for the right of good people to live in peace. Never forget that, ma sœur." A letter from Marie, her fellow codebreaker. "They'll never know our names, Doris. But they'll live in the freedom we help protect." "That's enough." Doris wiped her eyes, her resolve strengthening. The same evil she'd fought in her youth had taken new forms, but the stakes remained unchanged. The right of good people to live without fear. In the basement command center, her team gathered for what might be their final briefing. Maps and surveillance photos covered the walls, showing Steel Reapers' positions throughout town. "This ends now," Doris declared, her voice carrying the authority of decades of combat experience. "Rex has turned our community center into his fortress, but he's made a critical mistake. He's consolidated his forces in one location." Dr. Wong pulled up building schematics on her screens. "We've identified all entry points and blind spots. Their security is strong, but not impenetrable." "What about civilian casualties?" Marcus Jr. asked. "That's where our new allies come in," Doris smiled. Across town, in the basement of St. Michael's Church, Charlie stood before a group of determined townspeople. Linda Chun was there, along with Pete from the garage, school teachers, shopkeepers, parents, ordinary people who'd had enough. "We're not fighters," Charlie acknowledged. "But we can be eyes and ears. We can watch patrol patterns, report movements, create distractions when needed. The ghost has protected us. Now it's our turn to help her." Meanwhile, Rex's paranoia had reached new heights. In his command center at the community center, he was screaming at his lieutenants. "Someone's talking. There's no other way they could know our plans." He threw a chair across the room. "Find the leak. Find them, or I'll start making examples." Wyatt watched from the doorway, his decision crystallizing. That evening, he slipped away to meet Doris at their arranged location, the town's old clock tower. "Everything's in a sealed room beneath Joe's bar," he explained, spreading out hand-drawn maps. "Cash, documents, blackmail material. Their whole operation's financial backbone. Rex doesn't trust banks anymore. It's all in cash and hard copies." "Security?" Doris asked. "For men, rotating shifts. But I know their patterns, their weaknesses. And I know the combination to the safe room." The heist was executed with precision the following night. While Rex's attention was focused on fortifying the community center, Doris's team moved invisibly through the town's old drainage tunnels. Charlie's network of citizens provided perfect cover, reporting Steel Reapers' movements via encrypted texts. They emptied the vault completely, millions in cash, ledgers documenting years of criminal enterprises, evidence that could bring down corrupt officials across 3 states. By sunrise, Rex's financial empire was in ruins. His scream of rage when he discovered the theft echoed through the streets. 3 of his own men ended up in the hospital, victims of his fury. But help was coming for Doris. A black SUV rolled into town, carrying retired FBI Assistant Director Catherine Sullivan. She'd worked with Doris on classified operations decades ago, though few knew the true extent of their connection. "Been a while, Ghost," Catherine said as they embraced. "Brought you a present." She handed over a folder. "Full federal backing for your operation. We've been building a case against the Steel Reapers National Organization. Your evidence was the missing piece." The town's atmosphere began to shift. "We stand with Doris," signs appeared in windows overnight. When Steel Reapers tried to harass the grocery store owner, they found themselves surrounded by angry citizens filming with their phones. Small acts of defiance multiplied. Children drew ghost emblems in chalk on sidewalks. Someone projected Doris's wartime photo onto the town hall at night. The fear was lifting, replaced by determination. But Rex had one final card to play. Charlie was walking home from a late strategy meeting when the van pulled up. The blow to his head was quick, efficient. By the time Doris got the call, he was already tied up in Rex's new hideout. "Final chance, Ghost." Rex's voice dripped with malice. "Surrender yourself at midnight. The old factory on River Road. Come alone, or the kid dies slowly." Doris sat at her desk, pen hovering over paper. If things went wrong, she needed to leave something behind. 2 letters, her will, and a message for Charlie. "My dearest Charlie," she wrote, "if you're reading this, know that I faced my final battle without regret. You showed me that the fight for justice never ends, but neither does the courage of good people. You've become the son I never had, and I'm proud to have known you." The second letter was shorter. "Last will and testament of Doris Mackenzie. I leave my home and all assets to Charles Martinez, with the stipulation that the Basement Command Center be maintained as a resource for those who continue to fight for justice." She sealed both letters, then began preparing for battle. Her old service pistol was cleaned and loaded. Her black tactical gear, preserved from her last mission, still fit. In the command center, her team waited for orders. Dr. Wong's computers hummed, satellite imagery showing heat signatures at the factory. Marcus Jr. checked weapons and equipment. Catherine coordinated with federal tactical teams standing by. "Rex thinks I'm coming alone," Doris told them. "He thinks age has made me weak, that sentiment will make me careless. He's about to learn why they call me the Ghost." She touched the medal around her neck. Robert's medal, her good luck charm through countless operations. "Charlie is family," she declared, "and nobody threatens my family." Outside, thunder rumbled across the sky. A storm was coming. But Doris Mackenzie, veteran of shadows and secrets, had always preferred to work in darkness. The Ghost was going hunting one last time. Thunder rolled across the midnight sky as Doris studied the abandoned Anderson factory through her night vision binoculars. The dilapidated structure rose like a metal monster against the stormy horizon, its broken windows reflecting occasional flashes of lightning. Decades of rust had transformed the once proud industrial complex into a maze of shadowy corridors and treacherous catwalks. Building schematics confirmed 3 main entry points. Dr. Wong's voice crackled through their encrypted comm system. She sat in her mobile command center a mile away, surrounded by screens showing thermal imaging and surveillance feeds. The loading bay to the east, main entrance to the north, and the old emergency exit on the west side. Heat signatures indicate 20 hostiles inside, concentrated in the central assembly area. "Charlie's position?" Doris asked, her voice steady despite the stakes. "Second floor, northwest corner office. 2 guards outside the door, 1 inside. He's alive and moving. They haven't hurt him seriously." Marcus Jr. crawled forward through the mud to join Doris at her observation point. Rain dripped from his tactical gear as he pulled up his own binoculars. "Their perimeter security is sloppy," he whispered. "Overconfident. They're expecting a 90-year-old woman to walk in alone, not a coordinated tactical response." "Good," Doris replied. "Let's use that assumption." She touched the medal hanging beneath her black tactical vest. Robert's medal, worn on every mission since his death. The familiar medal warmed her fingers, grounding her in memories of past operations. Catherine's voice joined the comm channel. "FBI tactical units are in position, hidden in the tree line beyond their sensor range. On your signal, Ghost." Doris gathered her team for final instructions. They huddled beneath a tarp, rain drumming against the fabric as she outlined each phase of the operation. Every person had their role, their timing coordinated down to the second. Remember, she concluded, Rex's arrogance is our advantage. He thinks he's dealing with a helpless old lady, not a veteran operative. But don't get cocky. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Just like Naples in 44, James Cooper, the demolitions expert, remarked with a grim smile. Remember that warehouse trap? Similar, Doris nodded. But this time we have better tech and more support. Dr. Wong, begin electronic countermeasures. Jam their phones and radios, but make it look like storm interference. Lightning flashed as Doris approached the factory's main entrance alone, her hands raised in apparent surrender. The mud sucked at her boots, each step carefully measured. In her ear, Dr. Wong counted down the positions of hidden Steel Reapers members. Sudden floodlights blazed to life, momentarily blinding her despite her tactical goggles. Dark figures emerged from behind rusted machinery, their weapons trained on her position. The scene reminded her of another ambush, long ago in occupied France, but she pushed the memory aside. Focus on the now. Rex's voice boomed through a megaphone from his position on a raised platform. Welcome to your last stand, Ghost. Drop your weapons and step into the light. Try anything clever. And Charlie dies screaming. Doris complied, letting her visible sidearm fall to the ground. Her true weapons, including the ceramic knife in her boot and the garrote wire in her sleeve, remained undetected. The Steel Reapers had indeed chosen their ground well. Gunmen lined the catwalks above, covering every angle. Others crouched behind old equipment, creating overlapping fields of fire. Rex himself stood elevated, playing to his theatrical nature, wanting to look down on his supposed triumph. Not so tough now, are you? He sneered, his voice echoing in the vast space. The legendary Ghost, finally caught. I've got to admit, you had me worried for a while. But in the end, you're just a sentimental old woman who cares too much. I'm surprised, Rex, Doris replied, projecting her voice, clearly while surveying the positions of each enemy combatant. All this effort just for little old me? I thought you were smarter than that. Shut up. He gestured to his men. Search her. Then bring her up here. I want her to watch while we deal with her young friend. Two bikers approached confidently, leather creaking as they moved. The larger one grinned, cracking his knuckles. Always wanted to rough up a senior citizen. In her ear, Dr. Wong's voice whispered, systems engaged. Ready on your mark. Doris waited until the men were within arm's reach. The moment they touched her, she gave the command. Ghost team, execute. Multiple flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously on the catwalks, their brilliant light amplified by the reflective metal surfaces. Smoke grenades followed instantly, filling the factory floor with thick coverage. The sudden sensory assault sent the Steel Reapers into chaos. Doris moved like liquid shadow, decades of combat training taking over. The first man reached for her throat. She redirected his momentum, using his own weight to slam him into his partner. Both went down hard. A precise strike to neural clusters ensured they stayed down. She's gone, one of them shouted in panic. Where did she dash? His voice cut off in a gurgle. Marcus Jr.'s team breached through the roof access points, while James Cooper's group entered through pre-weakened wall sections. Dr. Wong's drones had disabled the factory's power grid, leaving only emergency lighting that created more shadows than illumination. The Steel Reapers' numerical advantage evaporated in the face of superior tactics and technology. Their night vision equipment was consumer-grade, no match for the military spec gear Doris's team employed. In the darkness, they fired at shadows while precise attacks came from unexpected angles. Meanwhile, Charlie had been preparing for his moment. The training sessions with Marcus Jr. hadn't just been about self-defense. They'd included escape techniques, lock-picking, and improvised weapons. Using a stripped wire from his chair's metal frame, he worked on his restraints while his guard was distracted by the chaos outside. The moment his hands were free, Charlie grabbed the heavy wooden chair and swung it with all his strength. The guard turned at the last second, but too late. The impact dropped him like a stone. That's for kidnapping me, Charlie muttered, quickly searching the unconscious man for weapons and keys. He found both, along with a radio that crackled with increasingly panicked communications from Rex's men. They're everywhere. Martinez is down. Can't see anything through this smoke. Someone help. She's right behind Dash. Rex's voice cut through the chaos, edged with desperation. Find her. Find that old witch. Shoot anything that moves. Looking for me? Rex spun to find Doris standing on his platform, her black tactical gear making her seem part of the shadows. Despite her age, she moved with the fluid grace of a lifetime warrior. You're nothing but a sad old woman playing soldier, he snarled, drawing a serrated combat knife. I'm going to enjoy this. I'll make you scream before you die. You never did learn, did you? Doris sighed, shifting her weight slightly. Always underestimating your opponents. That's why you'll fail, just like every other bully I've faced. Rex lunged forward with surprising speed for his size, the knife slashing in deadly arcs. But Doris wasn't there. She moved like water around his attacks, each evasion requiring minimal movement, letting his own momentum work against him. Stand still and die, he roared, frustration making him wilder. Why? She asked calmly, avoiding another slash. Your technique is terrible. Who taught you to knife fight? A movie? Her hidden blade flashed once, a precise strike that sent Rex's weapon spinning away into the darkness. He stared at his bleeding hand in disbelief. Impossible, he gasped. You're just an old woman. I've been fighting men like you since before you were born, Doris said, her voice taking on an edge of steel. Bullies who mistake cruelty for strength. You're not special, Rex. You're not even particularly good at being evil. A gunshot cracked through the air. Rex staggered, blood spreading from a wound in his leg. Behind him stood Wyatt, his former second-in-command, weapons still trained on his old boss. That's for Tommy, Wyatt said grimly. And everyone else you've heard. He turned to Doris. He's all yours, Ghost. Just say the word and I'll finish it. Rex lay bleeding on the platform, his facade of power completely shattered. Do it, he spat. Finish it. Prove you're just as bad as me. Doris looked down at him, remembering all the pain he'd caused. Charlie's kidnapping, Linda's burned store, the fear in people's eyes. Her hand tightened on her weapon as memories of other enemies, other choices, flickered through her mind. No, she said finally, her voice firm. You don't deserve a martyr's death. You deserve to face justice, real justice, for your crimes. To sit in a cell, forgotten and powerless, watching everything you built crumble. Catherine's voice came through her earpiece. FBI teams are moving in. We got the building surrounded. Good work, Ghost. Within minutes, the factory was swarming with federal agents in tactical gear. Rex and his surviving men were led out in handcuffs, their empire in ruins. Evidence teams began documenting everything, ensuring that the entire operation would be dismantled legally and thoroughly. Catherine approached her old friend with a proud smile. The evidence we seize will take down their entire national network. Multiple federal agencies are moving on their other locations right now. You didn't just save your town, Doris. You helped us break one of the largest criminal organizations in the country. Dawn was breaking as they emerged from the factory, the storm finally clearing. To everyone's surprise, a huge crowd had gathered. It seemed the whole town had turned out to witness the Steel Reaper's downfall. Linda rushed forward to hug Charlie, tears streaming down her face. Pete from the garage was there, along with dozens of others whose lives had been touched by both Rex's cruelty and Doris's courage. They formed a spontaneous corridor, applauding as Doris and her team walked past. 3 cheers for the Ghost, someone shouted, and the crowd erupted in celebration. Doris accepted their gratitude graciously, but her finely honed instincts remained sharp. As she surveyed the joyous scene, she noticed something out of place. A figure standing apart from the crowd, watching intently before melting away into the shadows. She recognized the stance, the careful observation. Someone professional, someone dangerous. Not all threats announced themselves with motorcycles and leather jackets. Everything okay? Charlie asked, noticing her distraction. Fine, she replied, but her mind was already analyzing possibilities. The Steel Reapers were finished, but something told her this victory had drawn attention from other quarters, perhaps more dangerous ones. Her suspicion was confirmed when she found a note slipped under her door that evening. Impressive work, Ghost. Perhaps we should talk about a larger problem that requires your unique skills. The world still needs people like you." Later that night, as she sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea, she smiled at the irony. She'd spent decades trying to retire from the shadow world, only to be pulled back in by a gang of bikers. Now that same action had apparently caught the eye of someone else who needed the ghost's help. "What do you think, Robert?" she asked her husband's photo on the wall. "One more mission for old time's sake?" The phone on her counter, not the old rotary this time, but a new secure line, began to ring. Outside, thunder rolled again, as if nature itself was anticipating whatever challenge awaited. The ghost's work, it seemed, was far from over. The interrogation room was cold and sterile as Doris watched Rex through the one-way glass. FBI agents had been questioning him for hours about the Steel Reaper's operations, but his latest revelation had brought Catherine rushing to get Doris. "You think you've won?" Rex's laugh was hollow. "You have no idea what's coming. Vincent's going to burn your precious town to the ground." "Who's Vincent?" the agent asked. "The man who made me," Rex sneered. "The Steel Reapers? We're just one small piece of his organization. I was nothing but a franchise owner, and you just got his attention." Doris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Catherine handed her a thick file. "Vincent Kovalev," Catherine explained, "former Special Forces, went rogue after the Cold War. Built one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises we've never been able to touch. The Steel Reapers were just a front for his larger operation." Doris studied the single blurry photo in the file. A tall man with steel gray hair and cold eyes. "How bad?" "International arms dealing, human trafficking, corporate espionage. His people are ex-military and intelligence operatives. They make the Steel Reapers look like a high school gang." As if to emphasize the point, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. The message was simple. "You've interfered with my business. There will be consequences." Within days, the consequences became clear. Black SUVs with tinted windows began appearing around town. Men in expensive suits and military haircuts took rooms at the local hotel. They didn't swagger like the Steel Reapers. They moved with the precise efficiency of trained killers. Vincent himself arrived on a private helicopter, landing at the small municipal airport. Security cameras captured his arrival. Tall, distinguished, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked more like a CEO than a crime lord, which made him all the more dangerous. The town's mood shifted instantly. Where there had been celebration after the Steel Reapers' defeat, now there was dread. Vincent's men didn't need to make threats. Their mere presence sent people hurrying home and locking their doors. "These guys are different," Pete whispered to Doris in the garage. "They bought the old warehouse on 5th Street. Paid cash, installed military-grade security overnight. They're professionals." Linda Chin's newly rebuilt store received a visit from Vincent's accountant. A perfectly legal offer to buy her out at twice the market value. When she refused, health inspectors showed up the next day. Her permits were suddenly under review. Doris watched it all from her kitchen window, feeling every one of her 90 years. The battle against Rex had taken more out of her than she cared to admit. Her joints ached from the combat. Her reflexes weren't what they used to be. "Maybe it's time to let younger people handle this," she mused aloud to Robert's photo. "I'm too old for another war." Charlie found her packing her most important documents. "You're leaving?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "Sometimes wisdom means knowing when to step aside," she said softly. "Vincent's organization is beyond my capabilities now. The FBI can handle this." "That's not true," Charlie insisted. "The FBI didn't save us from Rex. You did. Because you understood this town, these people. Because you cared." He pulled out his phone, showing her social media posts from townspeople. They were sharing stories about her, about how she'd given them courage. "The ghost isn't just you anymore," Charlie said. "It's become something bigger, a symbol that ordinary people can stand up to evil. If you leave now, Vincent wins without firing a shot." Doris stared at the posts for a long moment, remembering similar conversations from her war days. Evil never rested, but neither could good people. "All right," she said finally. "But we do this smart. We need a new team." Over the next few days, Doris made calls to old contacts. Some were retired, some still active in various agencies. Each owed her favors from past operations. Colonel Sarah Martinez, demolitions expert from Desert Storm, arrived first. Then came Michael Chun, no relation to Linda, former CIA electronic warfare specialist. David Cooper, Australian SAS sniper. Rachel Wong, no relation to Dr. Wong, corporate security consultant with expertise in financial investigations. Local recruits joined too. Pete volunteered his garage as a safe house. Linda organized a network of shopkeepers to watch Vincent's men. Even former Steel Reapers who'd turned against Rex offered their knowledge of criminal networks. But Vincent struck before they were fully prepared. The attack came at dawn, synchronized explosions at key points around town. The police station, power substation, water treatment plant, and communications center were all hit within minutes. Professional teams moved in during the chaos, setting up checkpoints and cutting off access roads. Within an hour, the town was effectively under siege. "This is what real power looks like, Ghost." Vincent's voice came through every phone in town. "Surrender yourself, or watch everything you love burn." Emergency services were overwhelmed. Fires raged unchecked as Vincent's men prevented fire trucks from reaching them. The hospital ran on backup generators while treating dozens of injured. But in her command center, Doris smiled grimly. Vincent's attack, while devastating, revealed something crucial about him. "He's showing off," she told her team. "All this precision, this overwhelming force. He's not just trying to win, he's trying to prove his superiority. That's a weakness we can exploit." "How?" Charlie asked. He'd taken charge of coordinating civilian responses, showing natural leadership ability that made Doris proud. "Men like Vincent need to demonstrate their power. So we'll give him a target he can't resist me. But first, we need the town ready." Charlie organized the community into response teams, medical support, communications, supply distribution. People who'd never considered themselves fighters learned to be lookouts, relay messages, and provide safe houses. "Vincent expects us to be helpless," Charlie told them. "Let's show him what this town is really made of." The plan seemed to be working. Vincent's men found themselves increasingly frustrated as the townspeople slipped through their checkpoints, shared resources, and maintained communication through old-fashioned methods that couldn't be hacked or traced. Then came the betrayal. Rachel Wong, the corporate security expert, missed a crucial meeting. Hours later, Vincent's men ambushed one of their safe houses. The timing and precision of the attack made it clear they had inside information. "She accessed our secure files last night," Dr. Wong reported, checking the logs. "Downloaded everything." The damage was catastrophic. 3 team members were wounded. Safe houses were compromised. Supply caches were seized. Years of carefully cultivated contacts were exposed. When they finally found Rachel, she was already dead. Vincent's way of tying up loose ends. "He's sending a message," Catherine said grimly. "No one is trustworthy." But Doris had seen too many friends die over the years to let this break her. She gathered her remaining team, their faces illuminated by emergency lighting in the backup command center. "Vincent thinks he can break us with fear and betrayal," she declared. "He thinks we'll turn on each other, run away, give up. But he doesn't understand what we're fighting for." She spread out a map of the town. "This isn't about me anymore. It's not even about Vincent. It's about proving that ordinary people can stand up to tyranny, whether it wears a leather jacket or an Italian suit." Charlie stepped forward. "The town's with you, Doris. All the way." One by one, the others nodded. They had lost friends, seen their plans destroyed, but their resolve was stronger than ever. "Vincent wants to see the ghost?" Doris's eyes gleamed with determination. "Let's show him what a real ghost can do." As the team began planning their counterattack, Doris touched the metal around her neck, Robert's medal. She could almost hear his voice. "Show them why they called you the ghost, love." Outside, Vincent's men patrolled the streets of their captured town, confident in their superior training and equipment. They didn't notice the shadows moving in the growing darkness, the quiet preparations being made in basements and back rooms. The ghost was going to war one last time, and this time, she had an army of her own. In his command center at the warehouse, Vincent reviewed surveillance footage of Doris's previous operations. "Impressive for an old woman," he mused, "but obsolete. The world has changed." "Sir," one of his lieutenants reported, "all units are in position. The town is secure." Vincent nodded, satisfaction evident in his cold smile. Excellent. Now, let's see how the legendary ghost handles a real professional operation. But as he spoke, the lights in his warehouse flickered briefly. In the moment of darkness, something changed in the room, a shadow that hadn't been there before, a whisper of movement at the edge of perception. The ghost was already hunting, and Vincent didn't even know it yet. Storm clouds gathered over the town as Doris's team moved into position. The warehouse district had become Vincent's fortress, surrounded by armed guards and surveillance equipment. But the ghost had spent decades perfecting the art of invisibility, and she'd taught her team well. Alpha team in position, Colonel Martinez whispered through the comm system. Her demolitions experts were ready to create precisely calculated distractions. Beta team ready, Michaelchin confirmed. His electronic warfare suite had already mapped every security camera and motion sensor. Charlie team standing by. Charlie himself reported from his position coordinating the townspeople. They would play a crucial role in Vincent's downfall, though he didn't know it yet. Doris checked her equipment one final time. Despite her age, her hands were steady as she loaded her weapon. Remember, she told her team, Vincent expects a direct assault. He's prepared for military tactics. So we're going to give him something else entirely. The operation began with silence. Michael's systems created subtle glitches in Vincent's security network. Nothing obvious, just enough to make his professionals doubt their equipment. Colonel Martinez's explosives weren't dramatic. They created small, mysterious failures in power and communications. Something's wrong, one of Vincent's guards reported. Sector 3 sensors are showing multiple anomalies. Check them, Vincent ordered from his command center. All units, maintain vigilance. The ghost is trying to play her games, but Doris's real strategy was already in motion. Throughout the town, ordinary citizens began implementing plans they practiced in secret. Shop owners accidentally delayed Vincent's men with lengthy transactions. Cars developed mysterious problems at crucial intersections. Power outages struck random buildings, forcing security teams to investigate. They're dividing our forces, Vincent realized too late. Call everyone back to dash. The real attack hit from multiple directions simultaneously. Colonel Martinez's team breached the warehouse's outer defenses while Michael's electronic warfare suite crashed their communications. But the true surprise came from the townspeople themselves. Every window overlooking Vincent's position suddenly filled with mobile phone lights, hundreds of them, blinding his snipers. Car alarms activated in coordinated waves, masking the sound of Doris's team moving into position. Years of professional training meant nothing against an entire town working as one. Impressive organization, Ghost. Vincent's voice crackled through the emergency channel. But let's see how your civilians handle real violence. His men opened fire, but the townspeople were already under cover, following plans Charlie had carefully prepared. Each act of resistance was coordinated, precise, and virtually impossible to counter without causing civilian casualties that would bring unwanted attention. The battle moved through the warehouse district like a deadly chess game. Vincent's professionals found themselves facing an opponent who knew every move before they made it. Doris had spent weeks studying their tactics, their tendencies, their weaknesses. But Vincent had one final card to play. As Doris's team approached his command center, he triggered charges planted throughout the town. Buildings began to crumble, forcing her to divide her forces between the assault and rescue operations. Your weakness was always caring too much, Vincent taunted through the comm system. How many innocents will die while you chase me? Charlie took charge of the civilian response. Everyone knows their evacuation routes, he assured Doris. Go finish this. We'll handle the rest. But as he coordinated the emergency response, Charlie spotted something his teams had missed. A second set of charges near the town's main power transformer. If it blew, the hospital's backup generators would fail, killing dozens of critical patients. Without hesitation, Charlie raced to the transformer. He had seconds to make a decision. The bomb disposal teams were too far away, but he remembered something from his training with Colonel Martinez. The blue wire isn't always the answer, kid, she'd said. Sometimes you have to take the hit to save others. Charlie managed to direct the blast away from the transformer, but the explosion caught him in its edge. The last thing he heard was Doris screaming his name through the comm system. The sight of Charlie's broken body being rushed to the hospital changed something in Doris. The measured tactical approach disappeared, replaced by a cold fury that her oldest enemies would have recognized. "You want to see the real ghost?" She snarled into the calm. "Watch carefully." She moved through Vincent's defenses like a vengeful spirit. Years of experience and countless operations distilled into pure lethal efficiency. His men never saw her coming. Vincent waited in his command center, weapon ready, watching his security feed show nothing but static. "Come on, Ghost. Show yourself. Behind you." He spun, firing in one smooth motion, but Doris was already moving. Despite his superior strength and speed, he couldn't land a solid hit. She flowed around his attacks like smoke. "Impossible," he gasped. "You're 90 years old." "I stopped counting birthdays after 50, Doris replied. "Too busy fighting men like you." The fight was brief but brutal. Vincent's military training met Doris's decades of experience. He was stronger, faster, better armed. But Doris had spent a lifetime turning such advantages against her enemies. When it ended, Vincent lay disarmed and defeated, staring up at a woman who had rewritten every assumption he'd made about age and capability. "Go ahead," he spat. "Finish it." Doris saved her weapon. "No. You're going to live a long life in a small cell, watching everything you built crumble. And every night, you'll remember how an old woman brought down your empire." Federal agents swarmed the building, led by Catherine. "We got them all," she reported. "Every safe house, every corrupt official, every hidden account. Vincent's organization is finished." The town emerged from the battle changed, but unbroken. Emergency crews worked through the night, and by dawn the true extent of their unity became clear. Everyone had played a part in their liberation. Doris spent the next 3 days at Charlie's hospital bedside. The doctors were optimistic, but his recovery would take time. When he finally opened his eyes, she was holding his hand. "Did we win?" he asked weakly. "You won it for us," she replied, tears in her eyes. "That transformer supplied power to 30 critical care patients. You saved them all." Charlie smiled. "Learn from the best." Over the next few weeks, the town's recovery amazed everyone. People who had never spoken to their neighbors worked side by side to rebuild. Vincent's attempted destruction had only strengthened their community. Linda's store became a coordination center for reconstruction efforts. Pete's garage ran a free repair service for damaged vehicles. Every day brought new stories of cooperation and resilience. But as she watched the town heal, Doris knew her time there was ending. Her mission was complete. More importantly, the town had learned to stand on its own. One morning, she sat down to write a letter to Charlie, who was still recovering in the hospital. "My dearest Charlie, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't try to find me. The ghost needs to remain a mystery. But know that you've become the son I never had, and I'm prouder of you than words can express. This town doesn't need my protection anymore. It needs leaders who understand that ordinary people, standing together, are stronger than any force that threatens them. Leaders like you." The ghost was never about one person. It was about the courage that lives in everyone, waiting for the right moment to shine. "You showed me that when you risked everything to save others. Take care of our town. Keep teaching people to stand up for what's right. And remember, sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones nobody sees coming. All my love, Doris." She left the letter with Linda, along with keys to her house and instructions for maintaining the command center as a resource for future generations. 2 months later, the town gathered to unveil a new monument in the square. A simple bronze plaque read, "In honor of the ghost, who taught us that courage knows no age, and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they stand together against injustice. May her example inspire generations to come." Charlie, finally out of his wheelchair but still using a cane, ran his fingers over the inscription. A hint of movement caught his eye, a familiar figure watching from the shadows. But when he looked again, there was nothing there. In the years that followed, the town flourished. Charlie became its youngest mayor, implementing programs that emphasized community engagement and mutual support. Linda's store expanded into a community center. Pete's garage trained young mechanics for free. The ghost became a local legend, but also something more, a reminder that extraordinary heroes can look like ordinary people, And that age is no barrier to courage. Sometimes, on quiet nights, people claim they saw an elderly woman walking through town, checking on her neighbors, making sure all was well. But no one ever got a clear picture. And in a small apartment in Paris, or perhaps a cottage in England, or maybe a beach house in Australia, a 90-year-old woman read newspaper articles about her former home with pride. The metal around her neck caught the light as she smiled, knowing that some battles were worth every sacrifice. The ghost had fought her last war, but her legacy lived on in every act of courage, every moment of solidarity, every time ordinary people stood up against injustice. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. What do you think about everyday heroes living quietly among us? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hit that subscribe button and join us for more incredible true stories that will change how you see the world. Don't forget to ring that notification bell, because you never know when the next unlikely hero will emerge from the shadows. Until next time, remember, age is just a number, but courage is timeless.